Begin the current Daf Eruvin Daf. Begin on the bottom of Yomei, fall ends up at the bottom of the Yomei. But we continue to explain the halacha of our Mishnah regarding the placement of the kaira in the mavoi. Appreciate everyone who's joining us for today's Daf. Appreciate everyone who joined us last night for the Galaseum. It was beautiful, really wonderful. So what we're going to be discussing in today's Daf are regarding the Tzuras HaPesach, which we discussed in the Mishnah, which is where we're going to start off with, that the Tzuras HaPesach allows you to have a width wider than 10 amas, which although generally the mob is only allowed to be 10 amas, it actually even permits for higher than 20 amas too. The question that's going to be discussed, however, is regarding the maltara. Maltara is a very interesting, unique looking type of a wood, which that permitted it when it's higher than 20 amas. The Gemara is going to discuss and not really resolve, does that even permit it when it's wider than 10 amas too? The halacha of the Tzuras HaPesach, the crossbeam that must run over the side beams, or can they even come out from the sides of the side posts? I mean, the question is, Tzuras HaPesach, as we'll see, is when you have a kana, and a kana al gabein. Question is, could it even be if it's not from the top, but even from the side? We have three opinions about what's necessary to close off the fourth side of a mavoi, that's what we've been discussing a batana regarding a kaira. It's actually a three machlokes regarding what's necessary to permit that fourth side. So in the key terms, the concepts are kana mekan, v'kana mekan, v'kana gabein, like we said. That's how the Tzuras HaPesach functions, is that you have a pole on one side, a pole on the other side, and you have a pole on top of those two, basically like a ches. That's what a Tzuras HaPesach is. A door frame is. You have two sides of a door, and you have the lintel. That's how a Tzuras HaPesach, which really means the frame of an opening, that's how that functions. The concept of what's called chaykin lahashlim, which is, if you could see over here, actually a lot of homes have this. Someone actually asked me recently a shayla regarding mezuzah, which is actually we're going to discuss something similar to today's daf. Is like a doorway. A doorway is not necessarily a perfect square. It has like a dome. So the question is, do we say that you carve out the interior to make it the dimensions? Because let's say a mezuzah, a doorway, has to have 4 by 10. Yet here you see that the actual entryway is not perfectly square. Do we say, and we'll see exactly what the parameters of the machlokes is, do we say chaykin, that we carve out lahashim to complete the dimensions of 4 by 10? So we begin the current daf Yud, that's Yud Aleph, or we're in the bottom of Yud and Beis, 4 lines up at the bottom of the Yom. What we said in the Mishnah, continuing on to the next thing. In Yeshli Tzuras HaPesach, we said that, that if it's wider than 10 amas, you have to diminish it. It can be wider than 10 amas. But there's an exception. If you have a door frame, and alpha bishurach message, even if it's wider than 10 amas, in the tzarch l'mayit, you don't have to diminish that width. The Tzuras HaPesach makes it into an opening. So on that, the Gemara concludes like this. So Ashkechan Tzuras HaPesach, we find that the door frame, the mehani berachbei, that helps in the width, meaning it validates even if it's wider than 10 amas. Now, also that's this picture, and also v'amaltra the mehani begavoi, that begavoi. We also have this amaltra, which we also said in the Mishnah, which is a very unique looking piece of wood, whether it looks like a nest, whether it's just a fancy piece of wood, that validates even if the mob is higher than 20 amas. Those are the two things we said in the Mishnah. This validates wider than 10 amas in the width. This validates higher than 20 amas in the height. Now, as you continue to Aleph, Omen Aleph, Ipchamai, as Taisa explains, the first question on Ipcha is, does a Tzuras HaPesach help in the height too? Meaning we said that a doorway will help even wider than 10 amas. Will it help also for the validation of being higher than 20 amas? Says the Gemara Tashma being right, the time I've learned the Brisa. The Brisa says clearly, Mavishu Gavoy Me'asam Amma, you might. So as we always been saying, if the alleyway, if the crossbeam is higher than 20 amas, you have to lower it down. But when Yesh like Tzuras HaPesach, it has a door frame in the tzarch l'mayit, you have to lower it down. Clearly we answered that question. The Tzuras HaPesach helps not only for wider than 10 amas, it even helps higher than 20 amas. Now, but then the question is, what's with the other case? Amaltra berachbei. If you have an amaltra with the alleyway is wider than 10 amas, what's the halacha going to be over there? So the Gemara says, Tashma, the Gemara attempts to bring a right time like learn the price. The price says, Mavishu Gavoy Me'asam Amma, if you have the alleyway that the crossbeam is higher than 20 amas, so you should lower it down. So too we have the other invalidation, not just the height. If it's wider than 10 amas, you have to also diminish that, make it narrower than it should be 10 amas. If you have a door frame, in a tzarch l'mayit, you don't have to make it smaller, which we said that works both in the height and the width. Now, if it has this amaltra wood, in the tzarch l'mayit, you also don't have to lower it. Says the Gemara, my lava seifa, isn't this that you don't have to lower it even going on, not just on the height, but also on the width? Says the Gemara, it's not necessarily approved. Areish, I can tell you that's going only on the first halacha, which is regarding the height. That's a malta is going to work, but maybe it's not going to work on the width. So again, we have not really resolved the question regarding a maltra. Now the Gemara says, in our Mishnah we said that if it's wider than 10 amas, then it's invalid. But it's Tzursa Pesach, as we mentioned, our Mishnah, as we start off the daf, clearly says that it's going to be valid. However, the Gemara brings the Masnei le Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda taught L'chiyah barav, to Chiyah barav, the son of Rav, Kamei de Rav, in front of Rav. He taught on the halacha of our Mishnah that if it's wider than 10 amas, you have to make it smaller. And even if it has the Tzursa Pesach, ein tzarich l'mayit. No, meaning Rabbi Yehuda was teaching that you don't have to diminish it. Meaning that's the way our Mishnah is. On that Amalei, Rav said to Rabbi Yehuda, Asnei teach tzarich l'mayit. You have to make it smaller, even if it has a Tzursa Pesach. Rav was disagreeing with this opinion. So Rav essentially was saying that no, it's not going to work. So he disagrees with the version we have in our Mishnah that says that Tzursa Pesach is going to work. He says no, it doesn't work. If it's wider than 10 amas, you have to make it smaller. It doesn't work even with Tzursa Pesach. Now, Rav Yosef, a very interesting calculation the Gemara says right now. So Rav Yosef, he says, Mediver Rabbeinu, from the words of our teacher, meaning from Rav, that he says that a Tzursa Pesach is not effective when it's more than 10 amas. Nilmad, we can learn that the following halacha. Chatzar or courtyard, at first glance it doesn't look like it matches up, but the Gemara is going to explain what it is. Chatzar or courtyard, Sheruba Pesachah B'chalonis, that has the majority of openings and windows, which Rashi explains specifically, it's on all four sides. And the reason for that is, as we'll explain regarding the context of parts Meruba Lo'emet. So if this is on all four sides, not like this picture actually shows, if the windows and the gateways are on all four sides, Einin Niteres B'Tzuras HaPesach. So then, it's not going to be permitted with door frames. Meaning, even if the doorways here are less than 10 amas, and if you have a doorway, usually that's considered as a Pesach, and that's going to validate it. No, it's not going to be permitted with the Tzuras HaPesach. Says Gemara, my time, what's the reason? Where do you see that enemies from this teaching of Rab that he says this is invalid, to say that this case is also going to be invalid? Says the Gemara as follows, the following logic of comparison. Let's keep these two pictures in mind. Since according to Rab, when it's more than 10 amas, this is something that invalidates by mavoi. And also, when you have more breaches, which is what this chutzner has, more breaches than closed areas. Is it invalidation by a chutzner and says it's not going to be a Pesach? Oh, so wait a second, let's make the following comparison. Just like when it's more than 10 amas by the mavoi. It does not become permitted by a Tzursa Pesach, even if the doorways would be less than 10 amas. So then in this case, when you have the parts, the breaches more than the closed area by the chutzner, it's not going to be permitted by the Tzursa Pesach. In other words, just like Tzursa Pesach doesn't help by Yesem Esed to make it into a doorway, so too, it's not going to help by Tzursa Pesach, even when it has this smaller, meaning here, even when it's smaller than 10 amas. This is more than 10 amas. But we're telling you that Tzursa Pesach is not going to make it work. Here, its own problem, which is when you have more parts than on the Oimid, because it's more breached than closed, then also the fact that they're Tzursa Pesach is not going to be permitting it. Just like over here, the problem by the Mavi. There's a Mavi, there's a Chatzar. Just like a Mavi, an alleyway. Its problem is not get ameliorated with a Tzursa Pesach. So to over here, by the Chatzar, its problem of parts of Limit does not become ameliorated with, ameliorated means say like Masukin, like fixed, with Tzursa Pesach. That's what he wants to compare. No, so that's what I'm saying. It is Tzuras HaPesach.
This is a real Pesach.
It's Tzuras HaPesach. It's a door frame. Well, it's not a door. There's no door there. What's the difference between this and this? It's also a doorway. It's a Tzuras HaPesach. It's the form of a doorway.
Tzuras HaPesach. It means it has to be Tzuras Chayayim.
Yeah. So that's why you have in both pictures. You have them in both.
If there would be a door, that would change the situation.
Yeah, because then it's closed. A door we consider as closed. The door is, that's why on Shabbos not chayv b'boina, when it opens and closes, why you want to chayv b'boina every time you do that, because we consider it as closed. So that was the comparison they wanted to make, but the Gemara rejects the comparison. He says no. Regarding this case of Rab, when it's more than 10 amas, that we can say it's going to be invalid by the Mavai, there it makes sense why Tzursa Pesach that Rab holds is not going to be effective. Why? Because this is a more stringent Isser. Why is it more stringent Isser than this? Says the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because we did not permit, even by the walls of the well, for according to Reb Meir, meaning it comes out according to Reb Meir that we never permitted in any place in the halachas of Shabbos a gap more than 10 amas, even by Pasei B'Rosh, according to Reb Meir, who he says later on the second paragraph of Yizayin the base, he says that the gap between these side posts cannot be more than two groups of 3 oxen walking together, which is 10 amas, because every ox is an amma and 2/3 of an amma. So, according to Rameir, even by the lenient possibilities, we only allowed an area of 10 amas. So you see that the problem of Yosem Esther is a very big problem. Because even by the lenient possibilities, which we made it very good leniencies, we'll see later on Daf Yomi, still we didn't allow more than the gap of 10 amas. So that's why Tzuras HaPesach is not going to be effective, because it's a really big problem with Yosem Esther. But in contrast, this problem of having more breached area than closed areas, that's a problem by a chatzar when it's breaches of 10 or even of less. Because if it's going to be less than that, at least you can have a Tzuras HaPesach. Shekein netartes al possibilities of libra hakol, where you actually did permit according to everyone, because even according to Meir, who's stringent by the possibilities, and he says it's a problem more than 10 amas, but when it's more breached area than closed area, obviously this is by possibilities we let it by parts of it's way more breached than closed. And for sure, according to Yehuda, who validates it even when it's up until 13 amas in the third, so therefore, maybe then I would say that actually parts of would work. Because we see by possibilities we're lenient with that, and therefore maybe we would allow Tzuras HaPesach to work, in contrast to the problem of Yosem Esther, which we don't find anywhere in the halachas of Shabbos. Yosem Esther is going to be mutter. Maybe actually we would say that it would be a problem even with the Tzuras HaPesach. So it's not a raya. Maybe in this case of Rabbi Yosef, we would hold that. Possibilities is not working with Tzuras HaPesach, but the problem, but the problem of parts of we find that problem that you're ameliorating with Tzuras HaPesach, it's not such a big problem. We find something parts of is okay. So it's not such a big problem, so Tzuras HaPesach could work for it. Here, the Yosem Esther, we don't find anywhere according to Rameir that that's going to be fixable. So Tzuras HaPesach is not going to work. Just because we don't find anywhere that works for Yosem Esther. This problem is something that's not even a problem. Okay, not such a big problem, so maybe Tzuras HaPesach could work. But this problem, we don't find anywhere that works, and therefore maybe Tzuras HaPesach will not be able to fix it. So that was what the Gemara wanted to reject. Now, however, the Gemara says, there's no pictures on this, but the Gemara says, let's bring a raya to this opinion of Rabbi Yosef, who wants to say that he wanted to compare. Let's bring a right to Rabbi Yosef that Tzuras HaPesach will not be effective, even by this case of Emeru Bela parts. What's the raya? So the Gemara brings up Raisa. The Fanas Halol, these walls, which walls? Which sounds like the case of Rabbi Yosef, really. Sheruban Pesachim Bechaloin, so the majority are the openings and the windows. Mutter, it's permitted to use Achatzir. As long as there's more closed than breached. So the Gemara jumps and says, wait a second, how are you reading the Brisa? Sheruban Sakadaitan, do you think it really means the majority are going to be closed? But you just told me a second ago that the majority of them are windows and doorways, which obviously more breached than closed. How are you then saying as long as you have the majority of it being closed? Say, rather, what do you have to amend the Brisa to mean? Sheriba, not Sheruban, Sheriba ben Pesachim, that you have a lot of windows and doorways. And that's all around. That's going to be permitted. So even though you have many windows and doorways, but the majority is still going to be closed area than breached areas. So that between every doorway, you're having the more than the doorway that's closed off. So obviously you see, says the Gemara, that you need to have parts, and even though these are Tzuras HaPesach, still you see from the Bryce like Rabbi Yosef that it would be invalid even though it's a Tzuras HaPesach. So says the Gemara, no, Amar Kana rejects the Rice. Says, Kitan Yehi, when did we learn that Bryce? Although there's doorways, but they're not valid doorways to be Tzuras HaPesach. It's not a case of Tzuras HaPesach. Because if it did have a Tzuras HaPesach, maybe it would be valid even though it's not a Meruba the parts. We're talking about the Pischi Shimoi. We're talking about decrepit doorways that are lacking fixing, meaning they're not really qualified as a Pesach. The word Shimoi is like a Zokan HaShmoi, which is, he's lacking Torah. It's a doorway that's lacking. So Gemara says, my Pischi Shimoi, what's this lacking doorway that you're not considered as a Pesach, and therefore it's not going to be valid until you have Meruba the parts? Says the Gemara, two interpretations. Pligi by Rabbi Chumi by Rabbi Yosef. Chadama one says the Leslie Shikfi. We're talking about that there's no mezuzahs, there's no side post. What does it mean there's no side post? How can you have a door without any side post? So it's talking about where the stones are coming out one on top of the other, but you don't have a door frame because it's like a brick coming out of here, a brick coming out of here. It's not a regular side post. You don't have a regular door frame. That's one interpretation. But Chadam, the one says the Leslu Tikri doesn't have a roof. There's nothing on top of the two sides. Rather, as some Rashis have a picture that the two walls go up and it's open like that, and that's not going to qualify as a Pesach because the Gemara is going to tell us later on. A Tzuras HaPesach is when you have a side post and a side post, and you have a beam on top of them, and here there's no roof, so therefore there's no raya to Rabbi Yosef. Because yes, over here, this case that we described in the Bryce that's going to be invalid unless you have Merubal parts, is not because like Rabbi Yosef says, yeah, parts of Merubal is not going to be fixed with Tzuzah Pesach. It's because there's no Tzuzah Pesach. What do you mean no Tzuzah Pesach? There's doorways. No, the doorways either are not a doorway because they had these bricks coming out and like it wasn't a flush doorway, or because there was actually nothing on the top. So that's why it wasn't considered as a Tzuzah Pesach to permit it, even though it's parts of Merubal. So the Gemara continues now regarding this halacha that we said of Rav, that Rabbi Yochanan also holds like Rav, who he had said not like our Mishnah. He had said that a Tzurza Pesach is not going to help more than 10 amis wide by a mavoi. So Rabbi Yochanan also holds like this. Now how do we know Rabbi Yochanan holds like this too? Because which the Gemara is ultimately going to reject. The Amar Ravin by Rav Adam Rabbi Yitzchak. He says, there's a story with one person, from the fields of Beis Chorson, which is the name of a place. What he did was that he wrapped around, he stuck into the ground 4 poles, on the 4 corners of the field, and he went and he wrapped around a vine on these poles that you have in the picture over here, one to the other, like a tzuras HaPesach. So he wrapped it around, and now it's made like, it's connected, almost like the way a chuppah would look like. So, now this incident came in front of the sages, and they permitted him regarding the laws of kalayim, meaning, what does it mean regarding the laws of forbidden mixtures of planting? Which if let's say he has inside this area, this perimeter, he has grapevines that are growing. You're allowed to plant right outside that, so to speak, mechitza, that partition, other types of vegetation, wheat, barley, as the Mishnah teaches in Baba Basra, that if there's a wall between the grapes, you could plant on one side of the wall grapes, on the other side you could plant the wheat, the barley, and all those other things. So this is considered as a mechitza, that from the grapes inside to the plantings outside. That's what they permitted regarding the laws of climb. On that, Rish Lakish had said, just like they permitted this as a wall regarding laws of forbidden mixtures, so too they permitted regarding Shabbos that you're allowed to carry inside. It's considered as a closed off area. That's what Rish Lakish held. Rabbi Yochanan may disagree. He says no. The climate for the laws of climate they permit him. Shabbos regarding Shabbos they did not permit. Now says the Gemara Bayaskin, what's this case? And we're going to prove that Rabbi Yochanan holds a graph. Because what are we talking about? If you think that they wrapped around the vine from one pole to the other side, from the middle of the pole, meaning what we call the side, not on top of the pole, but rather on the side of the pole. And anyone knows anything about the laws of common day Eruvin, they're very busy trying to get on top of the utility poles, not the side, because that's called minat sad. That if you're saying that it's minat sad, not on top, how could you say that's the case of disagreeing about? He says in this halacha, if you make the door frame from the side, not the top, you haven't done anything. So regarding Shabbos, how could Rish Lakish say that it's permitted regarding Shabbos, and how could it even be contested if it's obvious that that's not going to be valid? Say Ela al-Gaba. Rather, obviously we're talking about that this guy who he made the vine stretching from one pole to the other had done on top of the poles. And now, says the Gemara B'vai, if you think now the gaps between each pole, which again, if you look at it very simply, it's Tzuras HaPesach. These are all Tzuras HaPesach, they're all door frames. So if you look at it, that if it's within 10 amas, so B'holim Rabbi Yochanan Shabbos Loyim, the such a case Rabbi Yochanan say on Shabbos it's not going to work. What do you mean? It's 10 amas. Everyone agrees 10 amas is a Pesach, so of course there should be a bona fide area of Rosh Hashanah to carry inside over here. And Allah, rather, isn't it talking about B'yeser Me'eser? Isn't the case talking that it was wider than 10 amas from one pole to another one? So we see that's Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan held that no, regarding Shabbos is not going to work, because even though it's a Tzuras HaPesach, a Tzuras HaPesach does not help for when it's more than 10 amas. That's like Rab, who disagrees with the halacha of our Mishnah, or he had a different nusach in our Mishnah, telling you that more than 10, a Tzuras HaPesach is not going to help. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan said it's going to be invalid for Shabbos. Says the Gemara rejects the Rai and says, La'ilam, truthfully I can tell you that it's Be'eser, that it's a gap of only 10 amas. And still it's not a raya that Rabbi Yochanan is like Rab. Why? Because actually it's a minat sad. Actually it is on the side. It's in the middle of the pole, not on top of the pole. And that's machlekes Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish did not hold the halacha of Rav Chizda, and therefore he said it can be valid even though it's minat sad, even though for the laws of Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan held like Rav Chizda, and therefore he said minat sad is not going to work. Now, however, as Rashi points out, he does hold that when Rav Chizda said his halacha that minat sad from the middle of the pole is not going to be effective, that's only for Shabbos. But regarding climb, even minat sad is going to work. It's going to be as a valid Tzuras HaPesach because Shabbos is more stringent than climb, so that's where minat sad doesn't work. But for climb, it would work, and therefore it's not a raya that Rabbi Yochanan is like Rav, could be he holds that actually Yosem Eser would work, but here we're not talking about Al Gabein, we're talking about it's Minatzad, and that's why it's not effective. But then the Gemara says, V'ramid Rabbi Yochanan, V'ramid Shlakish Ad Shlakish. Well, we just explained for Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish, we seem to have a contradiction on both their opinions from a different halacha. The Amr Shlakish Mishum Rabbi Chanina, Shlakish had said, name Rabbi Chanina is continued on the base. Peya. If there is, the word peya here is like the word peya nachris, as the Gemara brings in Shabbos HaMaftal on the base. Peya nachris is like a shepa, which is a foreign braid. So the word peya, not from the corner, but it means the word like a braided vine, which is stretched out from one pole to another pole. So it's essentially the case that we're showing you over here in the picture. Muteris l'niklayim, that permits regarding the laws of klayim, avaloi l'shabbos. So that's contradiction number one, where Rish Lakish had previously said that this case, it's essentially the same case, helps for klayim and for Shabbos, and here he's saying no, only helps for klayim and not for Shabbos. And then we have Rabbi Yochanan, he says, oh, k'mechitzas l'Shabbos delay, just like it does not help to be effective walls for the laws of Shabbos, kach mechitzas l'klayim delay, so it doesn't help, it's not effective to be the walls for klayim. Wait a second, Rabbi Yochanan, the previous halacha said it just doesn't help for Shabbos, but helps for klayim. So both are contradicting, each one is taking a step down in this version of the machlekes. Says, same. Well, what do you mean?
Is also 10?
So we'll see. That's the Gemara. That's the next part of the Gemara. We'll see if that's going to be a point of differentiation. So the Gemara says, but it's up until that sounds like the same case. It's the same thing of the 4 poles, and for Klayim, does it work, and for Shabbos does it work? So the Gemara says, okay, we could resolve the question of the contradiction of Shlakish, because you could say, Hadidei, the first halacha that had said that it's going to be permitted even for Shabbos was his own teaching. This second brisa that he says it's not going to be valid for Shabbos is the Rabbi, because if you looked at the words, it was Rish Lakish in the name of Rabbi Chanina, but he himself doesn't hold to that. He holds it's going to work even regarding Shabbos. Fine, so we resolved the contradiction of Rish Lakish. Of Rabbi Yochanan and Kash, but regarding Rabbi Yochanan, where each one he said in his own name, we have a difficulty. Now says the Gemara like this: if you're going to say that Hasim over there in the first brisa was Al Gaban, meaning we wanted to say originally it's Al Gaban, but we said we reject it, say no, it's Minatzad. But if that's what the Gemara is asking now, if you say that the first case is talking about where the vine was on top of those poles, that's why we could understand why it's permitted regarding Klayim. And yes, it's talking about regarding it's more than 10 amas, because if it was 10 amas, you wouldn't be able to say Avaloi l'Shabbos, because everyone agrees if it's 10 amas, it is a doorway for the laws of Shabbos too. And then you could say that Hach over here in the second brisa, in the second case Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, is Min Hatzad, is from the side. That's why it's going to be puzzle. Shabbat would make sense. But Eliyam, you say like you wanted to say that Idvidim in that side, that no, both are talking about from the side. The Ma'ikal Mem, what are you going to say? So the Gemara basically wants to say that obviously you see Rabbi Yochanan does hold like Rav, and that Rabbi Yochanan holds that because you cannot say the first case is Minatzad, because then you have a contradiction. Obviously that it's Min Al Gabehan, and that you see it's Tzutzah Pesach does not help more than 10 amas like Rav. You want to reject and say no, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't necessarily hold like Rav. Because it could be it's Minatzad. But if it's Minatzad, then you have the contradiction of the second teaching. If you say the first one's Al Gabein, like Rab, that it's Yosem Eser, so that would make sense why the second halacha that he says is not effective even for Klayim, because that's Minatzad. But now the way you're saying that they're both Minatzad, so how do we resolve the contradiction? So it says the Gemara, no, it's not difficult. Both teachings of Rabbi Yochanan are talking about not from on top, so that has nothing to do with Rab's teaching. Rab's teaching was only when it's a regular Tzutzah Pesach, Al Gabein, but it's more than 10 amas. What's Allah going to be? So it has no relevance to Rab's teaching. It's talking about from the side. But how do we resolve the contradiction then? So if it's from that side, so what's Allah regarding Klein? So Hassam, and this is what someone had brought up just before, when did we say in the first teaching of Rabbi Yochanan that's going to be permitted at least by Klein? That's Be'eser, when it's an entry, when it's opening of only 10 amas. Hach over here in the second teaching is B'yosem Me'eser, is when it's more than 10 amas, and therefore even regarding the laws of Klein, it's not going to be effective. So therefore it's not a contradiction. It's Minatzad, which could work by Klein, not by Shabbos, but it's only going to work if it's up to till 10 amas. It's not going to work if it's more than 10 amas. And it says the Gemara, where do we know that we differentiate between the laws of Klein if it's 10 amas or it's going to be more than 10 amas, when it's Minatzad, when it's from the side? And that says the Gemara, because the Amalei Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish said to Rish Lakish, wasn't this such a story? Rabbi Yeshua went to Rabbi Yochanan to learn Torah. Although Rabbi Yeshua himself was proficient in Hilchos Klayim, the laws of Klayim, he still went to ask a question. You see that you could know something and you still go ask a question. Now, he found Rabbi Yochanan, he went to ask the shayla from. He was sitting between trees. He had spread out a vine from one tree to another tree. He said to Rabbi, my teacher, So he had this vine separating, and he says, if there's on one side grapes on the vine, what's the halacha on the other side of that vine, which he had spread out from tree to tree like a Tzuras HaPesach, could he plant other plants right there on the other side? So Amalei said to him, Be'eser, if it's an opening of 10 amas, mutter is permitted. Be'yosim e'eser, more than 10 amas, us is me forbidden. So says Gemara B'maiskin, what's that case talking about? What was that story? Ilim al Gaban, if you think that it was on top of the poles that he had stuck out a vine, so yosim e'eser aser? What? More than 10 amas if the Tzuras HaPesach for the client was on top, which is you have the two poles and you have on top of it, like this picture shows, that it's on top of the poles. If it's more than 10 amas, he would tell me it's forbidden for the laws of client. But Ratanya in the Bryce it says, Hoyisham konen hadekronin. If you had over there the poles that were dekronin from the word of decker, which is pointy like a decker, meaning it's like a peg that sticks into the ground, like a stake. You stick it into the ground. V'aslahan peya milmal, and you make a rope on the top. The Bryce says clearly a filabi yisim asamuta, even if it's more than 10 amas, it's going to be permitted for the laws of client. So how could he have told him that when he stuck in the poles and he put the vines on top and he says, oh, what's halach? He says, oh, 10's going to be okay. Wow, more than 10's going to be a problem. If it's al-gabay, and the Brisa clearly says that that's going to be okay. El-Allah, rather wasn't the case told Maminat Sad that it was from the middle of the pole, meaning which is essentially called on the side. But commonly he said to him, oh, be'esa mutter, 10 amas is going to be okay. Yushim esa asa, more than 10 is going to be a problem. Shemamana should obviously see that by Klayim, Tzuras HaPesach is going to be effective min hatzad on the side up until 10 amas, and therefore we have resolved the contradiction of Rabbi Yechanan, even if you say Rabbi Yechanan is not like Rav, because one halacha that he said that Tzuras HaPesach min hatzad is going to work for Klayim is told about when it's only 10 amas. The second teaching when he said it's not going to work by Klayim, even min hatzad, is when it's more than 10 amas, which we see that there is such a differentiation from this story that min hatzad only works up until 10 amas. Al gabay, if it's on top. Again, menatzad just means to say that you're wrapping the string around the side of the pole versus on the top of the pole. On the top of the pole is going to work even more than 10 amas. On the side is only going to work up until 10 amas, and that resolves the contradiction of the teaching of Rabbi Yechanan. Now the Gemara continues going back to these halachas to qualify Tzuras HaPesach. So Gufa we had learned on Amar Aleph, Amar Chizda. He said Tzuras HaPesach she'asim menatzad. The door frame that you made from the side, which means to say again that you have the two side posts and that you made the top part not on top of the two poles, but rather on the side of them. You haven't done anything. It has to be, Rav Chizda had said, to have the Tzuras HaPesach to be on top of them. Again, that's what he said in Kama de Eruvin. They're very careful to make sure that it's going to be milmala, because or else it's not going to be as a valid Tzuras HaPesach. Another halach of Rav Chizda, he says, Tzuras HaPesach she'amru. Regarding the door frame that they said, tzricha shtei bria. It has to be strong, kedei lahamid badelis, that you could put in a door, even whatever type of door it's going to be. Even if it's a door of straw from the stalks, even though it's like a paper thin door, but it's got to be able to hold a door, because else it can't be considered a pesach. Because if it can't, a pesach is only a door frame that a door could go in. But if it can't hold any door, it's not going to be valid. That's second criteria. A third criterion is Tzuras HaPesach, a door frame, has to have a recognition of the hinges. Again, because, so to speak, it's a doorway. It says the Gemara Heketzir. What does it mean, a recognition of a hinge? It's avkasa. It's basically the hole that the pivot of the door hangs on that. So even though it doesn't really actually need a door, but it needs to be fit to have a door, and therefore it has to have a door frame, which is two side posts on top of that. It also has to have that it has to be strong enough that it can handle a door no matter how thin that paper door is. And also it has to have the hinge, has to have the hole that the door could go into. Now the Gemara brings a story related to these halachas. Ashkechinu Rav Acha, Bered Rav Avia, he encountered Tamid Rav Ashi, and normally he said to them, did the master say anything regarding the halachas of Tzuras HaPesach? They said to him, he hasn't said anything. Now the Gemara discussed, the Mefarshim explain what is this story teaching us. So some want to say that the next brisa was part of that conversation. But Tanu learned the brisa that Tzuras HaPesach Shamru, the door frame that they said, is kan mikan v'kan mikan. You have to have a side post on either side. But kan al gabein has to be the pole on top of them, like we said. Now here's the question that takes us to the next Mishnah. The question is, tzrichen liga. So this that we said that you have to have the pole on top of that. The question is, we have a machlekes amram whether the top beam has to actually touch the side post. Does it have to touch the pole on the top to the poles on the side? Or maybe they don't have to touch it. Even if it's hanging on top in the ear, it's going to be valid. So it's machlokes. Rav Nachman when he says, and that's the halacha that ain't shichin liga. They don't have to touch. We find this many times in the commentary Eruvin. Rav Sheshes Shammai says, and that's classic actually in the commentary Eruvin, where you have like they make like a little beam over here, and you're using these wires up on top. It's classic ain't shichin liga. And Rav Sheshes it's shichin liga. Rav Sheshes says no, it has to touch. What? Right, but that's the thing is he's saying that that's the question. Does a door frame have to touch?
But
He's saying, okay, what's the halachic principle?
It has to be close to a certain amount, or it could be high as up, as much.
How high? Well,
Does it have to? Is it because we say lovwood or something, or just because?
right. What's the halachic principle? Right. So I mean, I do believe it has to be within 20. Trying to remember exactly if it has to what the exact parameters is, because by Kairi we say 20 amas. What's the exact parameters of the Tzuras HaPesach? So the Gemara here doesn't say, but it says, that's the question, does it have to touch or does not have to touch? So on that the Gemara brings a story which will clarify the actual halacha. Also Rav Nachman, who he was one of the disputants, he went, and he did a story by the Resh Galusa, which was the prince of the Jewish people in Gullus, like his teaching, which was, what he did was, he surrounded the area to carry over there. He made many entryways, more than 10 amas, and he made these side posts, and he made the beam on top, because if you make a Tzuras HaPesach, it's going to validate even more than 10 amas, because if it's within 10 amas, you don't have to make a Tzuras HaPesach, you don't have to make a lechi. But he made wider openings, and he made just doorways, but he made that it didn't touch like Rav Nachman held that ain't shichin liga, he made it that it wasn't touching. So he made these huge openings for the Resh Galusa without touching. Now, Amr Rav Sheshes, so Rav Sheshes said l'shamit to his attendant Rav Gada. So he said to the Heusbucher, to his attendant, he said to Rav Gada, who he disagreed, he holds no shichin liga, he said Zil Shleif, go take them down, shadinu, and throw them away. Because he held it wasn't valid. So Azul Shalav Shadinu. So his attendant goes, we did Ebazug, he goes, he took it down, he threw it away. Now, the house members of the Resh Galusa saw what he was doing, demolishing the Tzuras HaPesach that Rav Nachman made for them. Chavshu, they threw him into prison. So as Rav Sheshes come above us, Rav Sheshes, when he stood there by the entryway, Amalei said to him, Gada Puksa, Gada, which was his name, come out and go. Nothing Vasa, and he went out and he went. Ashkechi Rav Sheshes, so I guess an easy pass out of jail. The Ashkechi Rav Sheshes, the Rabbi Shloimy Rav Sheshes, who again, he held that it has to touch, and therefore he had it demolished. He said to her, he encountered Rabbi Bar Shmuel. Somebody said to him, Tani Mar Midi B'Tzuras HaPesach, did the master learn anything regarding the laws of Tzuras HaPesach? And he says, yes. Tanino, we learn the Brisa, this is going to qualify regarding this teaching. But first, it's in a different halachic context. Kippah, an archway, which is a gate that's made like a dome. Remeir Mechayev ben Mezuzah. Meir holds such a door entryway is going to be Chayev in the Mezuzah. V'cham Peit Mezuzah, you're going to be exempt. Why they hold you exempt? Because higher up, where it rounds off, and again, many doorways have this, especially the outermost part, which is the one that was telling the person to need a mezuzah over there, it's rounded off. Now, this part that's rounded off is not 4 tefachim wide, and a Pesach is not considered a Pesach if it doesn't have a width of 4 tefachim. So therefore, this can't qualify for mezuzah because, as we'll explain shortly, it doesn't have a width of 4 tefachim over here. That's a chamor. Now, they both agree that she'im yesh b'raglei asar. But if in the what we call the legs, if the bottom part has 10 tefachim height before it starts to round off, that there everyone would agree that shechayev is such a doorway would be chayev because you have the two criteria. You have a height of 10 tefachim and you also have a width of 4 tefachim. Now, even if you would say that the rounded off part would let it be closed off, it's not part of the opening, you would still remain with a shiur of a Pesach that's kosher, which is a gap, an opening of 10 tefachim height with 4 tefachim in the width. So obviously you see that they don't have to touch, which is not like Rav Sheshes. Why? Because here we see that we're validating the opening by the 10 tefachim lower part, even though the arched part, the dome part, is separate between the upper roof and the mezuzahs, and still you see that you're going to be chayiv. So you see that's considered as a valid Tzuras HaPesach, because we're saying that's a Pesach, that mezuzah, which is clearly not like Rav Sheshes. Now the Gemara just finishes explaining the halacha. Amar Abaye comes to explain and qualify as machlokes Yemin Rabbanan by the laws of mezuzah. He says, Hakol Moedim, everyone agrees, Im Gevaya Asara, if it has a height of 10 tefachim, but the Im B'Reglei Shleisham, but by the foot, the bottom, you don't have, what does it mean, Shleisham? You don't have in the height of 3 tefachim, if in the height of 3 tvachim it already got less than the width of 4 tvachim before it rose 3 tvachim, then it's nothing. And that would even be, even if you have enough to carve out, it wouldn't be anything. The reason for that is because whatever's less than 3 tvachim of height is considered like part of the ground. We say this many times in the Hilchos Shabbos. We say within 3 tvachim, it's called aris mechta. It's really still part of the ground. You can't call this yet the Pesach to say that it has a width of 4 tvachim to combine, as we'll shortly explain, for the height of 10 tvachim. So if within 3 tvachim it already lost the width of 4 tvachim, everyone's going to agree that there it's not going to be good. Similarly, inami, let's say the other variable. Yesh b'ruglesh lesha. No, let's say that the by the bottom it has a height of 3. If it has a height of 3 tvachim, and generally when it has the height of 3 tvachim, it has the width of 4 tvachim. But ve'en gavaya asar. But it doesn't have at all a height of 10 tvachim. Okay, everyone's going to agree, but the klum is not going to be anything because anything that's less than 10 tvachim is not significant. It's not a pesach. So we're saying that a pesach needs to have 2 things. It needs to have a width of 4 tvachim. It needs to have a height of 10 tvachim. Now, the width of 4 tvachim, everyone agrees has to be at least a height of 3 tvachim. And additionally, you have to have an actual height of 10 tvachim. So what's key pligi? When do they disagree? In the following case. B'yesh b'rgla gimel, in the foot that has a height of 3 tvachim. So it's not considered aras michta anymore. It's not considered ground. It is a opening of at least 4 tvachim in the width. So it has one dimension of the width because it has at least a height of that width of 4 tvachim. Now, v'gavaya asara. Now, together with the dome, it does have a height of 10 tvachim. But the thing is, ve'ein rechava arba. But the whole height of 10 tvachim does not have the thickness, the width of, from where it starts to turn, it doesn't have a width of 4 tvachim. But, v'yesh b'loch, you have what you could carve out, and you could demolish the rounded off part and widen it, lashlim arba, to complete it to be a width of 4 tvachim. Meaning, you could carve out, you could call the construction guy, and the whole dome is not going to fall down because the structure continues on either side. And it wouldn't collapse if you would try to expand the opening. You have what to carve out and expand. That's where the case of the machlekes is. Like you see, this is where the white lines are, showing you could carve out. You could call the guy who does construction and he could clear this away and you'll have the dimensions. He says we consider as if it's carved out to complete the measurement. So since you had in the height of 3 tvachim, you had the one element of the width of 4 tvachim, and then the upper 7 tvachim, that although but as long as you have the height of 10 tvachim, because you have the height, you shouldn't have it in the width. That's what we're going to say, chaykikin, that you're going to carve out to widen the dimension that you already have by the legs. Where abundance are there, hold on, that you don't say that concept, and since you don't have a full height of 10 tvachim by 4 tvachim, therefore it's not going to be valid to have the halacha of mezuzah. But one thing is, we see that Rav Sheshes was rejected. So Rav Sheshes tells Rabbi Bar Shmuel Amalei, he says, do me a favor, if you counter them, meaning don't tell the house members of the Resh Galusa anything. Mahomas needs to keep her from this price of the dome, because from there you see clearly not like Rav Sheshes, because you see that it helps, even though it doesn't touch the top of the roof. You see that we consider it as if it's touching that because the mezuzah has to have 2 sides and the top. You see that even though it's not touching, it's going to be valid. So therefore you see that he was rejected. You see the laws of Lechi, of Tzuzah Pesach works, even though it's Kan al Gabein and is not touching. So he says, do me a favor, don't tell them. We continue with halacha, the next mission that continues on Hechsher Mavli, how to validate a Mavli. So up until now we were only speaking about one cross beam or one Lechi. But we're going to see it's actually 3 machlekes. Hechsher Mavli, how do you validate an alleyway? Because you need to have, besides the 3 sides that are closed by an alleyway, the 4th side, so as not to be confused with the Rishus Harabim, it has to have something to differentiate it from the Rishus Harabim. So Bishamim, they say, Lechi V'Kair. They hold actually you have to have a side post and a cross beam, you have to have both. Bisilam, they say, no, Oy Lechi Oy Kair, either a side post or a cross beam. Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Lechian, you actually need to have 2 lechis, 2 side posts on either side of the entryway. Now, Mishum Bishmal, and name Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Talmud Echad, Lefnei Rabbi Kiva, one student said in front of Rabbi Kiva, that actually loy nechluku b'sham misil do not disagree al mavishu pachis marbamas. If the alleyway's entryway is less than 4 amas, the width of the opening, then actually everyone agrees, even Beishamai, should need to oy b'lechi oy b'kar. Beishamai would agree, although he's quoted as saying that you need both a lechi and a kaira. If the entryway is narrower than 4 amas, then everyone's going to agree that no, even he'll agree to Beisil that you need to have either only a lechi or a kaira. Aman nechluku, what's the case that they disagree? If it's wider than 4 amas, about Esther, because we said it only works up until 10 amas, from 4 amas to 10 amas. That's where we have the machlek shebeshem, and they say lechi b'kar you need to have both the side post and the crossbeam. They still say no, oy lechi oy kar, either one, either the side post or the crossbeam. On that, Rabbi Kiva said to that student, al zev azanach, it's not true what he's saying. They disagree not only when it's wider than 4 amas, even when it's narrower than 4 amas. Bisham is still going to hold that you need to have a lechi and a kar. So the Gemara says, come on, who's our Mishnah like? It's the like Chananya. It's not like Chananya who we quoted in the previous parak. Because as Rashi explains, the Gemara assumes right now that when we're talking about here in our Mishnah of Hechsher Mavai, what we're talking about was, how do you validate a Mavai Mefulish? A Mavai Mefulish is an alleyway that's open on both sides to Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara is assuming that our Mishnah was explaining a Mavai Mefulish, and therefore it's not like Chananya, who says in the previous parak that you need to have a deles, you need to have doorways to rectify a Mavai Mefulish. And it's like the Tanakh, it's not even like the Tanakh, it says, okay, you don't need doorways, you don't need doors, but you need doorways, you need Tzursa Pesach. Our Mishnah is not like either one of them, because our Mishnah is saying it's enough to be Masak and a Mavai, with just a Lechi of a Kaira, or just Lechi or a Kaira. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Hachakam, this is what our Mishnah is talking about. Our Mishnah is talking about a different case. Hechsher Mavai saw some cases, and our Mishnah is talking about how do you validate a closed off alleyway. It's only open on one side, not on both sides. That's where Bishamay say lechi v'kar, you need to have a side post and a crossbeam. Ubisil say oy lechi oy kairo, or a side post or a crossbeam. Therefore, it's no raya. It's not a difficulty with the previous paragraph, with the previous machlekes we had of Chananya and the Tanakama, because that was in the Mavai Maful that she would talk about in a Mavai Sasa. Now, the Gemara explains what seemingly is an inference from the opinions of Bishamay and Bisil. Bishamay and lechi v'kar, they say, okay, you need to have a side post and a crossbeam. Says Gemara, remembers that to say the Kasav B'Sham, because B'Shami hold Arba Mechitzas Daraisa, 4 walls are biblical. In other words, the laws of Mechitzas are Allah Chameshim Sinai, as we said in a previous daf. Now, it sounds like from B'Shami that less than 4 walls, it cannot be Rosh Hashanah. That's why you need to have a side post and a cross beam, that it should really be like a bona fide wall. Like you have a side post and a cross beam, it's like really closing it off. Like you have those when they block you from going, and you have these things. You have a side post and a cross beam. That's why you have to have both, because 4 walls are biblical. Which Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Maybe Lizrig, maybe to throw from Mishus Rabbim into this alleyway. Actually, Mishal should be Chayiv. Maybe with 3 walls, those already you would be liable, because actually biblically it's already Rosh Hashanah, the 3 walls to make a Rosh Hashanah. But Letalto, to carry inside the alleyway, the rabbis were decreed and they were stringent until you have 4 walls. So really, this Lecha B'Kar is not to make it biblically a Rosh Hashanah. Maybe it's only to make it rabbinically, but really biblically he would hold that 3 walls would be sufficient. And similarly, Beisilim, they said in our Mishnah, Oy Lechi Oy Kar. No, said either side post or crossbeam. Says Gemara, Lema Kasavi Beisil. Let's say Beisil holds Shalish Mechitzas Daraisa, that 3 walls are biblical, as discussing in the Rishonim exactly what the Gemara is saying in Beisil. But you see that you don't need the 4th wall, because or else you would hold like Bishama, you need Lechi B'Kar. You need either one or the other, just like a sign or whatever, or a weak type of wall. But you see, biblically, 3 walls would be the requirement. Because Gemara says, no, actually, I could tell you even less than that. Lizrik, when you're throwing him from a Shus Rab into the alleyway, Mishtayim with Mechayim. If it only has 2 walls, I could even tell you the Beisil hold it's a Rosh Hashanah Daraisa. But Latal to carry is Adek Shalosh until you have 3 walls. And then the rabbis came along and said that besides the 3 walls that you need to carry inside for it to be permitted to carry, that you would need to have also on the 4th wall to have a Lechi V'Kaira, to have either one, a side post or a crossbeam, but really that it could be that they would hold, we could say technically that they would hold it would be permitted even with 2 walls regarding the biblical law. Some of the things we discussed in today's daf, in Eruvin Daf Yid was, we explained the halacha of the Mishnah, that said if there's a Tzursa Pesach, if there's a doorway, then the Mishnah had said even though it's wider than 10 amas, then it's going to be okay, you don't have to diminish it. Now, the Gemara brought that the same thing applies to the height too. Not just, let's say, for the width, but even regarding the height. Both of those are going to be validated with the Tzursa Pesach. Now, what's with Amaltira? We had spoken about in the Mishnah regarding this, either it's like a nest, it's some type of interesting type of a wood. We said that, that's going to help for the height, so even though it's higher than 20 amas, this interesting looking amalter is going to help, but the question was regarding the width. We didn't resolve the question regarding would that work even if it's, let's say, wider than 20 amas. You have this interesting wood that we don't have a clear answer if that would help also regarding the width, even though we know it helps regarding the height. But Rav was quoted as saying that actually Tzursa Pesach is not effective for being more than 10 amas in the width, not like the way we have it in our Mishnah. He says, no, that doesn't help for yes and yes. Now, interesting, the Gemara wanted to learn out from a comparison to say that a courtyard that the majority have doorways and windows, which is essentially parrots, but it's also like Rashi says, from the Daled Ruchis, so therefore it's more flawed from all 4 sides, it's not permitted with a Tzursa Pesach. Why? Where do you see that comparison? Because you see a Tzursa Pesach is not effective. with the invalidation of more than 10 amas by the mavai. So the same thing would be by the invalidation of parts meruba, when you have more breached area by the chatzar, that you see tzuras Pesach is not an effective thing to be masakin. So the Gemara says no, you can't compare the two. Because by the invalidation of Yisem Eser, that we don't have any heter for the laws of Shabbos, even by the lenient law of Pasabaros, at least according to Remeir. Because he allows by the Pasabaros only 10. So you see that's a really big problem. We don't find anywhere else that that's okay. So maybe Tzuras Pesach is not going to fix it. But by parts Meruba, where we are lenient by the Pasabaros, that it could be more breached than closed area, so it's not such a big problem. So maybe with Tzuras Pesach, it would help, and therefore it's not a raya. It could be that would work. And also the Gemara says, no, it's not a right to Rabbi Yosef, who he's the one who wanted to compare, and say that yes, Tzuras Pesach is not going to help when you have more windows and doorways, but just like it doesn't help by the Yosem Eser, where from a brisa, which seemed to say that case, because the Gemara says, no, that case was what's called Pischei Shemai. It was a deficient doorway, and therefore didn't have a Tzuras Pesach. That's why it doesn't help when there's parts merba limit. But maybe Tzuras Pesach would help even there if it had a bona fide doorway. Now, what does it mean it didn't have a Tzuras Pesach? Either because it didn't have a side post or because it didn't have a roof. So that's why it wasn't a Tzuras Pesach. That's why it didn't help by parts merba. Maybe it would help even by parts merba limit. Now, but then the Gemara brought that Rabbi Yochanan also holds a grav that a Tzuras Pesach does not help for more than 10 amas. I mean, not like the way our version of the Mishnah was. It doesn't help Rav. The Gemara wanted to say holds a grav. We didn't see that. Because there was a story regarding 4 poles that were stuck into the ground and made like a chuppah. Then you made like a vine stretched out from one pole to the other, which the story was that helps regarding climb. You could plant right on the other side of those poles some other plant. Now there's machlekes Rabbi Yochanan Shlokish regarding the laws of Shabbos. And Rabbi Yochanan said it's not going to be effective regarding Shabbos. Now the Gemara proved, obviously we're talking about that the poles are al gaban, meaning when you have these 4 poles, that obviously is talking about on top of them. How do we know that? Because minat sad, Tzuras Pesach is nothing. So how could Rish Lakish say that it's going to be effective regarding the laws of Shabbos? Obviously, it's talking about Al Gaban. Now, it's also obviously talking about more than 10 amas. Because if we read 10 amas, how could you even say that it wouldn't work? It should work even for Shabbos, because everyone agrees that it's considered Pesach when it's 10 amas. Obviously, Rabbi Yochanan says it's invalid, it's talking about when it's more than 10 amas, even with a Tzuras Pesach, because it's a Tzuras Pesach. So you see, holds like Rav. So the Gemara says no, not necessarily. Kobe is talking about that it's only 10 amas, and it's Minatzah. And their machlekes is in the case of Rav Chisda. Rish Lakish does not hold like Rav Chisda, they holds it valid. Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rav Chisda, but that's why it's not going to be invalid. But not because of Yisem Eser. It's talking about it's Eser, but it's Minatzad. And Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rav Chisda, but again, specifically for Shabbos, we're going to climb, he held Minatzad, it is going to be effective. So then, but what do you do then? But then if you hold that teaching was actually Minatzad, then Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan both contradict themselves in the second teaching. Because in the second teaching, Rish Lakish holds it's going to be invalid for Shabbos, but in the first teaching he says it's going to be valid by Shabbos. Oh, he said, no, that's not a difficulty, because the second teaching was in the name of his Rebbe, that he holds it's valid even regarding Shabbos. And what Rabbi Yochanan holds is going to be invalid even regarding Klayim. In the first teaching he says at least valid Minatzad by Klayim. So it says not difficult. Yeah, both are talking about Minatzad from the side. And therefore, again, that's why it has no relevance to Rab's teaching. It's not on top of Yosem Eser, it's on the side. But over there in the first teaching was when it's only 10 amas. So therefore it's going to be kosher for Klayim even though it's Minatzad. The second teaching was Yosem Eser. Yosem Eser is invalid even by Klayim when it's Minatzad, and therefore there's no contradiction. On Rabbi Yochanan, again, we didn't prove that Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rab, that Yosem Eser is going to be invalid with Tzuras Pesach. Then we had 3 qualifications for the hechsher of a mavli of a Tzuras Pesach. We said that, first of all, the Tzuras Pesach has to be at least strong enough to receive a door. It could be whatever door it is, it can be made out of straw, but it has to be able to hold some type of a door. It also has to have a recognition of the hinge, which is the heket tzir, and also has to have a pole on one side and the other side and on top of that. Then we had a machlekes regarding, does that pole on top have to actually touch the 2 side poles? Now, so the Gemara ultimately proved from machlekes remain rabbanan regarding the laws of mezuzah that if you're chaykin lahashlim, which is because you need to have 2 halachas, you need to have 10 by 4, 10 height and 4 in the width. So that was the question regarding if you can be chayv from mezuzah by kippah. Now, Abaye had explained according to everybody, if you have 4 amas in the width, and it already has that for a height of 3 tfachim, so then that's going to be valid as long as it has a height of 10 tfachim. Also, if you have a height of 10 tfachim, then everyone's going to agree, meaning if you have these 2 criterion, then it's going to be valid. The machlekes was when you don't have for the upper 7 tfachim a width of 4 tfachim, but you could carve it out, that was the machlekes. But again, obviously you see that it doesn't have to touch, because there it's not touching the top of the roof. And everyone agrees that if you have certain dimensions, it's going to be okay. So that's where you see that it doesn't have to touch, and that's actually the halach l'maisa. If he told them, please don't tell them because he had them taken down by his gabbai, because he held it wasn't okay. Then we had the next Mishnah, which spoke about the hechsher of the mavi when it's, as the Gemara explained, not a mavi, a full like the Gemara thought in this question, but a cul-de-sac, a closed-off alleyway. So we said that one opinion says you need to have a lechi and a kaira. That was Beis Shammai. Basil says no, either side post or crossbeam. And then we had Rabbi Elazar says actually you have to have two side posts. Now there was an opinion which is a machlekes, if the Beis Shammai and Basil disagree when it's less than Daled Amas, or is it only when it's from 4 Amas till Yud Amas? That's where we had a machlekes that one student said in front of Akiva, they only disagree when it's 4 till 10. Akiva says no, even when it's less than Daled Amas, you still have the machlekes Beis Shammai Basil. Beis Shammai required a lechi and a kaira, so the Gemara says no, it's even possible that 3 mechitzas are going to be there, Raisa, to be chayim, let's say throwing from Shosharam. But this that you need to have 4 walls, which is let's say the lechi and the kaira, that's only to permit you to carry. That's where it could be rabbinic. So the Basil we said could be they hold even 2 walls are going to be deraisa, but the 3rd wall is just to help you carry together with a lechi or a kaira. Thank you to any time for hosting.